Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you for introducing me. So, just really quickly, for everyone who saw my talk, who didn't saw my talk last year at the Republica, so I was very fresh in there about the Internet in the ZDF TV Commission, and I talked about how that works and who's interested in that videos online. So, what is the ZDF TV Commission? It is, according to themselves, it's the lawyer, the representative of the viewer, and represents their interests against the ZDF. And ever since the highest court in Germany, a representative from the Department Internet is also allowed to sit in there, and I am that representative of the Internet part. And so what I want to show you today is not a review of my first 2 years of a public service gremium. It is more the intention to find first resolutions and feedback for the future. And so, first of all, I cannot start with it without looking at the current state of Internet and the public service broadcasting institutions. But I can actually export that. There's a media journalist who did that in a very detailed way for the media platform Übermedien. That is Stefan Stuckmann, in a very recommended but slightly hard to read article for Übermedien. He looked at the media libraries for ARD and ZDF, and his result is it's horrible. So he looked into the details, and it's like horrible because of the text and the images and the search bad usability, and also in a very linear logic of like broadcasting schedules. Here's a quote. So towards the end of the article, he says, "We are so deep in this and found horrible things. I believe you are ready for a piece of news that I didn't tell you at the beginning of this article. The ARD does not have one media library. The ARD has 12 media libraries. 12. One for every sub-broadcaster, one for the Deutsche Welle, one for Das Erste TV, and one that combines all of these together. Something he left out is the 13th media library, which is perfect, of course. Nonetheless, there is between the broadcasting studios they have realized that this is not very good use of fees, especially because those 12 media libraries don't exist in parallel. Because you could think like, oh, that's not a problem, because of course they are part of an open source code base or something, but that is of course not the case. So there's been the idea from the side of the responsibilities for the broadcasters, especially ARD boss Wilhelm, who proposed a super media library into the general discussion. So that means a better collaboration, and I don't want to make fun of this because this is going into the right direction, but why didn't I call my talk in a more optimistic way the super media library, but instead a Internetintendanz, like this weird word that no one really understands? The reason for this is that I believe that a super media library where the TV broadcasters work together is going not far enough, and also it's a too technical thought, especially because this doesn't follow the logics of digital platforms that are important in the internet, especially if you want to create a digital public, but especially if you want to create a democratic digital public. So which is of course the raison d'être of a public service broadcasting system. So if you are aware of this, who is aware of this are the British co-workers of the BBC, and they released a strategy paper called British Bold Creative and looked in the future of the BBC, and what they, among other things, see as an important task for the BBC in the future is establishing open platforms for content. And I believe with this point and what they describe here, a library that is open for content even outside of the contents, especially maybe even like user content. At least it shows that they have realized that that open platform and a special kind of openness, an organized openness, and that is very important for how digital public is created in the internet. And my takeaway for today is I want to see like how public service broadcasters can help create a democratic public in the digital age. And let me put this onto a certain base. So if I look at how do I create publicity, how do I create the public on the internet? So there's like well-known old players, there's private commercial broadcasters, there's public broadcasters, non-commercial broadcasting like free radios, and then there's like low-level publicistic activities like blogs, podcasts, the blogosphere, and so on. But all of these offerings, and especially like in a growing way, that linear public creation through the broadcasting system is losing its relative, and studies by ARD and ZDF show that very, very strongly, especially concerning young viewers. So the more the linear way of broadcasting, especially from the private commercial and the public broadcasting systems, the more digital platforms are are like growing into the center, and so the different offerings that we have in a digital media library like create the public, and they shape the public only through digital platforms. And what you can see in the current debate is it's no accident that the debate is mostly about the big proprietary platforms. And I would say that the discourse that is being handled here is very negative. Yes, saying like, oh, the public platforms are endangering the democracy and they create filter bubbles and fragmentation, and that's what I think dominates the debate. But I would say that this does not have to be necessarily the case. Instead, I would actually propose the thesis that the proprietary platforms actually shape open public new spaces. And if I talk about proprietary platforms, this sounds very scientific and abstract, but I am actually talking about YouTube and Facebook. This is what we're talking about. And if I talk about proprietary platforms that create new spaces for public political content, then you cannot be silent about this kind of content as well. You must not forget that this page and Pegida in general started as a Facebook group, and not only started as, but also because of the Facebook's algorithm, which empower outrage, that made them grow. So you have to ask yourself, how would, compared to a Facebook newsfeed algorithm, work? How would a public service broadcasting algorithm work if it would work? So it is a factum that because of these platforms, new actors get publicity that previously, as Chomsky would say, would have been filtered out in the media system. But there's all other examples. If we go to YouTube, for example, I would say YouTube is an example for the creation of new public spaces for cultural practices which were impossible or did not find a publicity. Like, this is a screenshot of a YouTube search for the phrase "no copyright intended," and what you will find, depending on your filter settings, is about 7 million results. And what this phrase shows is that people upload content to YouTube and then add the phrase "no copyright intended." Like, I don't want to intend getting the copyright, and this shows that the users are pretty sure about. They are not sure on the side of the law, and they want to get on the safe side by adding that, but of course that doesn't work. I want to say, like, this doesn't work under the law. But practically it kind of works. There's a reason that these people, these contents is being uploaded to Facebook and YouTube, because takedown notices are probably usually not being sent to Facebook and YouTube. So the notice doesn't protect you, but the notice helps the platform and protects it. And a platform like Facebook or YouTube is, of course, acting from a profit motive and is creating a safe harbor for a remix culture that creates new chances and a new diversity that shapes the culture and enriches the culture that we have, and that also would be more difficult under the law outside of these platforms and would also not reach other platforms. The price for this is that you have to agree to the Facebook and YouTube terms of service.
So basically, you agree to a way of implementing the law, and you don't really have any control over the way Facebook is enforcing the law. But in general, I would say that even these proprietary platforms actually create and enable new public spaces and new ways of being public. And one area we can see that is with the public broadcasting stations. We can actually observe this process. It's kind of arrived there because for a few years, Germany has had the youth offer Funk. Looking at the people here, I don't want to offend anyone, but I would say most of you are not part of their target group. The target group of Funk is mostly targeted at young people who are younger than 25. And it's stylistically and formally, it's pretty representative of a way of opening the broadcasting platforms up, and it's actually oriented towards these proprietary platforms and based on them. Why? That's because Funk is being published, planned, financed, organized beyond the linear broadcasting service. This goes so far to say that Funk. So actually, we had a law that had to be changed for this to make it possible. The duration of these offerings contents is to be determined in such a way that it represents the relative life of young and interests of younger people, and that it fulfills their democratic, social, and cultural needs. And so my question is, why is only young content for young people supposed to actually exist online in accordance with the way people live and in accordance with people's lives? But at least this paragraph means that, well, Funk is actually trying to get closer to people's lives, and maybe in the near future, not so far future, some other parts of public broadcasting stations offerings actually do the same thing. It's not like these other stations are not present on these platforms at all. So, for example, ZDF has YouTube channels. So, but of course there's a lot of criticism, and I think it's well-founded in some ways, that criticizes this strong presence of public broadcasting services on proprietary platforms, because of course it means that essentially these broadcasting stations that are funded by taxes by the public are strengthening these proprietary private platforms. But I think the reasoning behind this is to say that, well, this is where our target group is, this is where our audience is, and we go where our audience is. I personally, I'm not opposed to that. I think it would be an absolute disaster if we said that, oh, well, we'll just leave Facebook and YouTube to private people and we'll just kind of like stay on our public platforms. I don't think that could be the answer. But we still need to ask ourselves, if we think about the future of public broadcasting online, can it only adhere to the rules of these proprietary platforms? So we'll have a look at open platforms. So one way of saying this is to say there are no real open, non-proprietary alternatives to Facebook and YouTube that are actually being used by people. But there are at least some platforms that are open that have quite a reach. So, for example, almost every internet user in the OECD states visits Wikipedia 9 times every month, and this also includes the target audience that's most difficult to reach, which is young people who have a rate of using Wikipedia that is almost 100%. But so if you look at the content that is on Wikipedia, it's primarily textual content, and there's almost nothing that's essentially moving images. So something like what the broadcasting stations are offering on TV is not there at all. And so now I have a slide that I already showed last year, because last year I was wondering why public broadcasting content is not being offered on an open platform, and why it's not present on a platform like Wikipedia, which would actually be a dream partner. But so what has happened since? So that's actually what's really interesting. Since I first showed this slide a year ago, the following thing happened. These commercial platforms, Facebook and YouTube that I kept mentioning earlier, they announced that they actually want to use Wikipedia to combat fake news and to combat conspiracy theories. So I personally think this is a pretty good joke of internet history. So these platforms that since their inception, so Wikipedia, since its inception been accused of not being believable because anyone can publish there, that's the platform that is now considered the embodiment of credibility, and I would actually say with good reason. Because if you look at Wikipedia, fake news have always been a problem on this platform, because since it's been founded, everyone could have been writing on there. So since the beginning, people had to think about how to cope with this openness, and how do we make sure that the content we have is credible, is reliable, despite it being an open platform. And the answer is radical transparency, as an example. So for example, every entry you need to have a history, you need to be able to look at who edited it. One other answer is an open license. Another answer is a public discussion about content. And so if I look at what exists and what has happened beyond these proprietary platforms, then unfortunately it's the case that these public broadcasting services spend a lot of money to be present on YouTube and Facebook, but the amount of money that they spend to be present and on Wikipedia is basically non-existent. It's just not there. This is usually defended by saying, well, we need to have priorities. We need to prioritize. We have a limited budget. Of course, you need to prioritize. But I also believe that if you have limited resources, then you need to prioritize what you spend that on. But then why should you say that 100% of that is being spent on proprietary platforms and 0% is being spent on open platforms? Then I think that's a wrong way of prioritizing those limited resources. So if we go back to the question, well, we have this platform ecosystem and these broadcasting services need to kind of move and exist within that. It's just going to get worse. It's going to be stronger because less and less younger people are actually using linear offerings. So maybe for 5 to 10 years, you might be able to continue with those offers, but I think after that, it's going to be very difficult. So assuming this, and if you think that there is value in being present online beyond private offers, but that there's also publicly financed and tax-funded offerings online, if there's value in that. So the question is, how do we organize that on these platforms and in this platform ecosystem? So 1.5 years ago, there was a study in Germany by Der Holznagel and Picot, who said that they want a national open communication space. So they call it a public open space, and they want to create this public open space. I really like that. I think that's a really good idea, but maybe we can strike out national, and I don't think that quite fits a digital space, so maybe it should be transnational, but whatever. If we ask ourselves, how can we create this public open space? How can we create public democratic open space? And what can public broadcasting services contribute to that? So just as a caveat, so it's probably wrong to believe that that the creation of a public open space is only on the shoulders of public broadcasting services. The other way around, creating this space, they definitely need to contribute to that. They need to do part of that. They can, but they don't need to be the only actors who do this. And so I kind of want to go back to this this thing that I had earlier, and if you kind of look at all these people who are involved in creating these public spaces, private and commercial offerings, public offerings, non-commercial offerings, and things like blogs. So I would say there's that at least these public actors at least have a key role that they're not actually inhabiting right now. So what could this look like? One way of inhabiting this role would be to cooperate with non-commercial offerings. That doesn't have to be Wikipedia. It could be universities, archives, museums. You could cooperate with these institutions. You could maybe also interact with private and commercial entities, but you probably need to be a bit more careful about that. Maybe you can curate things that have been published in lower threshold spheres, like for example in blogs, something that Facebook and YouTube essentially do, right? But it could also mean that you start using open licenses in some areas, and something that's missing completely. It could also mean that you can use these significant amounts of money that you have from being funded by taxes, that you can use that to support innovation that serves the public, that's for the public benefit. So if we look at all these tasks that I'm now writing down and describing them to these public entities, and I have to admit, as someone who looks into organizations, I really have to say that it's definitely they're in over their head, not because they don't want, but one part is that they are not allowed to do all of this. Everything that I'm saying here requires changing the law that essentially regulates public broadcasting agencies. It's not about them not wanting it, but because they really can't. In the framework of the institutions that we have right now, and the structures that exist right now, it would be completely impossible for them to do all of this. So rather than not only do they have to continue doing this linear broadcasting thing that they've been doing for 40, 50 years, but they also need to do all of this on top of that. So what we need is a new public actor, a new public platform, and we need a new intendancy, this German word that they can't translate, the Internetintendanz that actually takes care of that. I'm using this very complicated word for that, not because I wanted to be the General Assembly of Media Library developers, but because I personally also really like this idea of having an intendant, which means there is one person that is elected in one way that is democratically legitimate and is responsible, but also has the ability to make decisions. And so, well, with great power comes great responsibility. So what would that look like? Or what could it look like? I think one thing that we don't want is more of these meetings. Well, at least I don't want more of these. So, because this internet intendant would also not be integrated into the current structures, but you could also create it through an assembly of all a broadcasting assembly, so they could all come together. So this would be of a significant size, and it would be more difficult to kind of divide it into factions, like might be the case, as I sometimes hear in the status quo. What would you have to give them? Well, so what I'm imagining is maybe giving them 2.5% of the taxes that go towards public broadcasting. That's around 200 million euros. That sounds like a lot of money, but considering how much I think they should be doing, it's the absolute minimum. And it's actually not that much, given that compared to what broadcasting currently has access to. Where could it come from? For example, for Funk, this youth offering that we were talking about earlier, they simply closed down one other channel and then took the money from there. And so how could controlling and oversight work? I think oversight could work through an oversight assembly that has a number of broadcasting
overseers,
the representatives that kind of are part of this. This is not an idea that I came up with, but that my colleague Christoph Bieber came up with.
So what would be the duties of this internet intendant? The first duty would be the creation of a public open source platform, open source, personalizable and social. The second thing would be distributing funds. So I don't want to create an internet social platform that just produces content. There is enough public content. It's just not being found online. So, or they're not being offered even, or they're not in the platforms, do not develop for the platforms that should show them. So the internet intendancy should not create their own productions. Not even for other broadcasters. Instead, at least 75% of the 250 million euros should go to third parties, content producers, innovation leaders, out of the public service broadcasting companies. So. That makes of course the broadcasters not very happy, that want to save more money. But if you want to have more acceptance for public service content in the digital age, then this is probably necessary. And the third duty is probably curation. So taking non-commercial offerings and offerings like blogs and podcasts and giving them a stage in form of corporations or in the education sector and or the existing portals and broadcasters. And if you take these three duties of this platform, these three duties, like the platform distributing funds and also like over to third-party actors, and then combine that with a curation, then we reach somewhere where we can call it the public service internet. So what I want to talk about, I'm here for the next 2 days. If you want to stay up to date with my work on the public service gremium, I tweet, and then on netzpolitik.org there's this this show called Noise, so there's also new stuff from the gremium. So thank you very much for your attention, and see ya.